very early in the lifetime of this show, the very first episode on El Faro, we learned that it is always worse in Alaska.
Yes.
We've also been up that way a few times on other episodes. Mostly early on, we talked about that fishing vessel, the Katmai, and we talked about the Scandies Rose also. I don't remember anything about the Katmai. I remember the Scandies Rose was the one with the ice buildup on the crab pots, I think it was.
I think it was a similar situation, if I remember correctly.
Just got overloaded and tipped over?
Open door. There was like some doors open, and so it took water and lost stability.
Okay.
That was a long time ago that we did that.
It was. That was like, I mean, literally 3 years ago at this point. So we are going to look in this episode. In this episode, the Russians are going to learn how bad it gets up in Alaska over a long period of time. The spark for this episode came from an article in the Pacific Northwest Quarterly from fall 2011 called Russian Maritime Catastrophes During the Colonization of Alaska, 1741 to 1867. So we've got over a century of shipwrecks to talk about here.
I was under the impression that Russia was in fact never a colonizer.
Yep. I mean, it's going to happen a lot here. Attempted colonization, at least for the most part, and some successful colonization. This article is by Andrei Grinyov, and it's translated by Richard Bland. Grinyov is a professor at St. Petersburg State Polytechnical University, studying the history and ethnology of Russian America.
Dick Bland is a fun name.
He's got a bland dick. It's not good, it's not bad. It's just kind of bland.
It's bland. It's fine.
This is actually going to be split into two. It's not a ridiculously long article, but there's so much information crammed into it. So this is actually going to be two parts. I think this was going to be technically our April $3 bonus episode, and then our May $3 bonus episode as a little bonus series here. This episode is almost entirely, I think every quote from this episode comes from this Grinyov article. There's a few others that I have that I might filter into the part two. Grinyov divides the history of Russian America into three time periods. The first of them being 1741 to 1798. This is beginning with the arrival of the first Europeans in Alaska who were on these Russian expeditions. 1799 to 1821. This is beginning with the Tsar granting exclusive commercial rights in Alaska to the Russian American Company and going through the end of their first charter. And then the final period being 1821 to 1867, going from the renewal of the Russian America Company's charter to the sale of Alaska in 1867 to the United States.
It is weird that they sold Alaska to the United States.
It is.
Like, just conceptually, that's weird.
Be odd to think about, like, if there was just part of Russia was on North America mainland.
I mean, according to that billboard that was posted at the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, like, they're getting it back soon. It's the beginning of the actual Fallout timeline when they have, like, the Battle of Anchorage and stuff.
No one thought there was going to be a second Battle of Attu Island. We will actually talk about Attu Island in this.
Japan's like, hey, we'll play this time, but we want to be on the
other side. So it mentioned those first Europeans to reach Alaska in July 1741. They came in two ships. One of them commanded by Alexei Ilyich Chirikov, who we'll discuss more in the history of Russian America. The other vessel was commanded by Danish explorer in Russian service, Vitus Jonassen Bering.
I know that last name.
The overall commander of the expedition.
I like that this is back in the day when you could just be like, I am an explorer. Who will pay me to go explore?
A nation like Russia that is desperate for anyone who knows how to sail a ship.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that Scandinavia has a surplus of. So during the reign of Peter the Great, he's usually just called Peter the First in Russian.
Mm-hmm.
The Russian Empire was looking to increase its access to the sea, in addition to expanding eastward. So this is why the city of St. Petersburg is built, so that they can have a port somewhere that won't freeze over in the winter. That's kind of one reason where you kind of see it in like Russian literature and just kind of Russian culture in general. St. Petersburg is kind of seen as a slightly less authentic Russian city because like the whole reason it was built was to keep up with the West and westernize Russia, whereas Moscow is the old traditional heart of Russia. The Kamchatka expeditions looked to accomplish both of these goals, expansion and access to the sea. So the first one, beginning in 1725, and also led by Bering, was the first scientific naval expedition undertaken by Russia. 1725 is actually the year that Peter I dies. So you can kind of see this is one of his later projects as he's modernizing Russia.
They're really late to the game, too, aren't they? We've been doing this for 200 years.
One of Peter's big tasks that he wants to accomplish when he becomes Tsar is to basically shock Russia into the modern world.
Peter's great leap forward.
Try to make it a modern European country. And so that's why you see so many Germans entering Russian service, so many, Danes and Swedes in Russian service, because Russia just doesn't have the personnel, the knowledge, the experience to do a lot of the things that they want to get done under Peter. So after this first expedition, the main takeaway was establishing for sure that there was actually a strait between Asia and North America that hadn't been totally established. I don't know that the Spaniards ever got quite up that far, at least on purpose, when they were up in the Pacific Northwest. But this is the thing that establishes, yes, for sure, there's water between these two places. The second Kamchatka expedition, which had been approved by Peter the Great, but again, he died in 1725. This wasn't actually undertaken until 1733. And this was a lot bigger in scale and in its aims. So it's looking to map the northern and eastern coasts of Siberia. It sounds like an extremely miserable job.
That does. That just sounds awful.